Let's move on now and talk about disability benefit claims, because disability benefit claims amongst working-age Britons will rise by 250,000 each year until the end of the decade. These are according to official forecasts. Now, 3 million people, it's amazing, claim personal independence payments. That is today. That will then rise to 4.2 million by 2030. This is according to estimates by the Department for Work and Pensions. So the predictions of this rise means the cost of footing the rising working age disability benefits will soar, already costing 31 billion quid now. And it will go up enormously over the next few years. Well, joining me now is Rakib Ehsan, who's a social policy analyst. Good morning to you.
Morning, David.
Really good to see you. I mean, this is a huge problem, actually, in terms of the economy generally.
Absolutely.
But when you're looking at another 250,000 people claiming PIPs and going up to 4 million people, there's something deeply wrong here.
No, absolutely. I think the reality is, and I think you agree with me, we just have a very sick society in the sense that social isolation is rampant in our society. I don't think the pandemic helped at all. If truth be told, and the associated lockdowns. I think that we have large sections of the population who are demotivated, suffering from mental health issues, which could have also been connected to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that we're talking about the sustainability of the welfare state here, ultimately. We're also talking about what's the purpose of the welfare state, and I think a big part of that is actually enabling people and helping them get back into work. I think the real issue here is that we do have many able-bodied people, younger people in the country, but they just do not have the tools or indeed the mental resources in order to enable themselves to be back participating in the labour market.
Aren't they lazy?
I don't want to be in the business of calling people lazy and feckless. I think that's unproductive. I don't think that helps the conversation forwards. But I do think that we need to have a conversation in terms of promoting values and traits such as resilience, determination. And I think that we need to move our mental health services more in that kind of direction.
So according to these figures, there are roughly 2.7 million people who are not in work. They're not looking for a job because of ill health. Now, the question is, and we were talking about this, Raj and I were talking about this earlier, how you define ill health. Because if you go to see your doctor and the doctor is the gatekeeper of that and they will sign you off, but if you say, I can't cope, I have mental health issues, the doctor's under so much pressure as it is that they are then signing those people off, and then that opens the doors for you to have those benefits. And also, I'm not sure that we attach enough sort of kudos to being in work, and I think you're right about the COVID thing. Basically, the government told people to stay at home, and people did stay at home, and now they don't want to leave home.
It's very difficult to reverse, though, when you become so used to it. For some people, it's very difficult for them to throw themselves back in the labour market. I also think that we have an issue here in the sense that ultimately mass immigration is being used to mask our worklessness crisis.
Yes, that's a great point.
So I think that we really need to look at social policy very differently, and I think that we also have to look at...
So what are you saying? Are you saying that we're importing cheap labour, and that in itself...
I think we've been doing that for decades.
We have.
And I think that the reality is we haven't looked at building our own internal resilience within our own domestic population, and I think we certainly didn't take that into consideration in terms of our COVID-19 policy and how that was managed by the government at the time.
PIP is interesting because it's a non-means tested benefit for those with health conditions or disabilities, and the payments of up to £9,500 a year. I mean, it's quite a considerable amount of money, and of course there will be those people that fall between two stools. So if you have that and then you end up in work, then obviously you lose that benefit, and it's tricky then. It's about how you empower people, I think.
Absolutely.
Here, isn't it? It's how do you grasp those people, particularly the young people, when you look at the numbers of those not in education, employment or training, and how do you fast track them into work? Because when you work, you also get positive mental attitude, and that reinforces that.
Oh no, absolutely. I think there's a great deal of self-respect and dignity that comes with providing labour and working. I think there's no two ways about that. I think that what we need a very looking at a sort of joined up approach in local communities involving schools, universities, local businesses, mental health services, social services and all the rest of it, in order to try and enable young people who would have suffered a great deal over the course of the pandemic, many not just the sort of, you know, in work, but not even having basic forms of social interaction as well, and that's definitely had an impact.
So just in terms of these figures, the government is going to be also setting out plans to get more people back to work next week. They've got a white paper that is coming out. I mean, they think they're going to be able to get people back to work, but again, like many of their policies, the devil is in the detail, and it's going to be much harder than they realise.
Oh no, there's no two ways about it. This is a huge challenge facing the country. But I do also think that over time it's fixable as well. I think we need to be optimistic, and we have to realise that what the problem is at hand, but we also have to be optimistic in terms of really resolving this issue.
We do. I mean, there's something like 1 million kids who are not in employment, education or training. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
No, absolutely. I think that the rate of youth economic inactivity is far too high.
Yes.
And I think it's something that's been overlooked for some time.
So, but how do you get people back into work when they go? And this is what I mentioned earlier on about the push me, pull me of the government. So you're saying we're going to get people back into work, but at the same time you're clobbering businesses and levying higher taxes on them, so they're not going to employ people. So again, not joined up.
No, absolutely. And I think that when you look at the government, many of the policies are contradictory. They work against one another. And I think one point we have to make, we need to provide an economy where young people have a realistic chance of building their own stake in society. If they feel they don't have a realistic chance of building that stake to begin with, how encouraged will they be in terms of getting back into work?
That's a really good point. And also, I think in terms of there is an onus on the employer to say that there is a career path for you in our business.
Absolutely, and I think that, but this is the problem though, that if you clobber businesses, then they have less funds available in terms of helping their workers build their skills, for example, saying that, you know, this would be quite a good training scheme for you to go on to. They won't be able to fund that because they may have to be paying more tax to the government in general.
There is a real sense when you talk to young people of, it's not apathy, it's despair.
It is. I think it's a very desperate situation. I don't believe, this is why I tried to move the conversation away from sort of laziness and fecklessness. But I think there'll be some people who do fall into that category, and I think we should be honest about that. But I think more than anything, there's just a demotivation issue. There really is, and that sense of despair that you talk about, because I still think that I want us to live in a property-owning democracy. I want people to be able to think, I can genuinely own my own home one day, that I can even start my own family. And I think that if you want to reach those realistic goals, then work will play a massive part in that. If those goals are not realistic, then how encouraged and how do you incentivise that search for work is very difficult.
But you make a brilliant point, and I was going to bring that up about housing, because houses are now so expensive, they're no longer aspirational, and certainly when I was younger, houses were relatively affordable for a flat. You could get on the housing ladder, and once you do that, you then aspire to do that, but then also once you've got a flat, you feel you're on the ladder. If young kids think that, well, there's no point, I will never own my own home, I'm not going to bother.
No, absolutely. And I think that is the problem, that in terms of looking at government policy, as you say, it needs to be joined up, it needs to work in unison, and I don't think that's quite happening at the moment.
No, so just in terms of that, so if we need to get all these people back into work and the government has this great plan, what do you want to see in the government's plan to get Britain working?
I think we need to have a skills revolution. I think that's the big thing. I think for far too long, the country generally has relied far too much on cheap foreign labour. But I do think that the government needs to rethink some of its business-related policies. Because if you want people to develop their skills and you want to help young people get back into work, then a big part of that, but a big part of that is actually allowing businesses to invest in those young people and actually make it more affordable for them in terms of employing new people into their businesses and firms.
But also this obsession with sending kids to university, I just think is misguided, because we need trade, we need crafters, we need the electricians, plumbers, etc.
No, absolutely, and I think we need what I'd call a sort of multifaceted education system. I think we need to reverse that culture of snobbery almost towards what I'd consider to be very important, high-value vocational skills.
Well, certainly the people who have trades that I know have done very well out of it, but they work very hard and they deserve it.
Richly deserve.
Just in terms of that, for the government, do you think the government actually understands the scale of the problem here?
I think the government may understand the scale of the problem, but I think that in terms of the policies that they're looking to implement, I don't think that they'll necessarily make the headway that we'd like to see. I think another issue is that if you look at the Labour Party more generally, it's a very different Labour Party, I'm gathering, to the one that you grew up with. You actually had people who were more into trades, they were more traditional working class. And I think that what we need a Labour Party that reconnects with those roots, and in terms of talking about the education system, actually valuing skills which are not necessarily academic, but nevertheless could provide a great deal of value to wider society.
I totally agree. Rakib, always good to see you. Thank you ever so much for coming in. Rakib Ehsan there, social policy analyst.